Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about Jack Henry wires. It was introduced earlier today. You see we've got some customers using it, and we've got some more coming. We happen to have quite a bit of APIs available. This demonstration will not show all of them. However, feel free to go to jackhenry.dev, the digital toolkit, or digital core, my bad, and visit the Jack Henry wires API set. I've already been introduced, but I've been working at Jack Henry for about 11 years now on a number of different products. I've been very fortunate to work with a great team and people there. They're super knowledgeable, and it's a great big family, like my esteemed colleague here, Brad. So this demonstration will not only talk about the wires themselves and the API set, but we'll give some historical information around the evolution of wires in general in the financial industry, typically banks. And we'll also go into some of the back-end pieces of what happens behind the scenes to give you a deeper look into what Jack Henry wires provides. So, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the old FAME format and wires. It's been around for a very, very long time. Had some distinct limitations, makes it pretty hard for engineers to work with that type of information. Have to build a lot of tooling around it. Well, our goal is to replace that difficulty and complexity with a really nice solution we call Jack Henry wires. Why now? The Fed has made some changes requiring participants in the wires network and future payment rails such as ACH, which will come down the road, to adopt these new standards. And that provides a lot of opportunities around fraud and also automated reconciliation and enforcement. The who, the what, and the why. Just a little bit more about the data side of it to give a little bit more understanding. But really the point of this slide is that we abstract that XML integration with the ISO messages into a JSON format. It's also important to understand that the format of those XML messages, I can't remember how many fields, but there's a lot of fields. I want to say close to 1,000. Don't quote me on that. And knowing which ones you actually need to fill out and to successfully send or receive wires can be very challenging. And so the Jack Henry wire solution makes that very simple with our API set so that you can accomplish the goal of integrating and successfully transmitting and receiving wires.
So David, let me ask you this real quick. We've recently redone the Jack Henry wire system, right? There's a version for FAME. We've come along and now done a version specific to ISO. Tell me a little bit about why we did that and what underlines the system.
Yeah, so really what we wanted to do was make the center of the wire system around those message formats, right? The reason why that's super important is obviously because of the way that the Fed is moving, but also because of the way that payments in general are moving. And so that underlying architecture ties us into the future of payments, right? And extending capabilities within that realm.
So it's fair to say that the new wires platform uses the ISO standards for its data layer, and then the ISO message flow is part of its workflow process.
Yeah, 100%. So the workflow around those centralization of the messages is actually one of the big values of the system. We'll talk about it a little bit more in detail in a further slide, but there's a lot of complexity as far as working with the Fed, the messages going back and forth, how the internal eventing works, so that things that are heavy load processes that would not be good for an end user experience, those things run on their own kind of background eventing and threading, so that the end user can understand, where things are, how they're getting there, are they successful, without necessarily having to wait in a request response model. Yep. All right. So this slide just talks a little bit more about that. But one of the real important things there also is the precise mapping for the ultimate debtor and creditor and extended remittance. So the Jack Henry platform does a really good job of making sure that like who the money's coming from, where it's going to, is an ease of integration for you as a developer, but also as a user of the product to make that experience very robust. We'll talk about some of those capabilities, but really what we're trying to do is make it really easy for someone who participates in this ecosystem to build upon it, but also the customers or the end users to use the system. All right, so this slide gives you a little bit of a glimpse of the architecture. It doesn't go down into finite detail, but it will show you the main participants. And you can see up here on the top with consumers, right, in the public API, Jack Henry, we have our own UIs that integrate to it today. Jack Henry Wires is what we call our enterprise experience. It's what our financial institutions use to manage the wires. We also have some third-party integrators as well. They may or may not be building their own UI, but they call our APIs. They may be facilitating a third-party like reconciliation system like SAP or what have you. And so that's also one of the considerations that we've taken into account as we're building these APIs to provide a good experience for the variety or the different types of consumers that can use the platform.
We talked a little bit about the workflow process and not having to be constantly asking and doing request response patterns. What are my options here?
Yep, that's a very good question, Brad. So,
I know, thank you.
It can be easy to look at this slide and look at it as a request response model, but we also have eventing out. Not only eventing within the Jack Henry platform and within the Wires product specifically, but we also event out as well. So there's different scenarios where that eventing could be helpful. For example, if you have notifications that you would like to send, hey, this wire completed, you wanted to send a notification out to interested party or parties. That's one example. We also, the data that's in there in the system is also pushed out to Data Hub. So as a financial institution, you have full access to your data. It's the same native data that we're using within the platform. It's not transformed in any way. You can put views in BigQuery and stuff like that to extract that data. So it's very, very powerful. There's certain things that you might want to run, like reporting, for example. We tend to want reporting to run outside of the OLTP model. So when the end user is in the application and they're using it to create wires, look at wires, that's our OLTP model. Whereas our reporting, the data is pushed out or replicated out of Cloud Spanner into BigQuery and available through Data Hub.
Matt talked about abstraction earlier. What are my options in terms of abstraction? Like you mentioned, bring your own OFAC provider, but what if I don't have a Jack Henry core?
Yep, that's a very good question. So we love abstractions. Most engineers do. I think one of the abstractions here at the very bottom is our third-party core integrations. So we do work with some different vendors, and those vendors have programmed into different core types. And what that allows us to do is we can route the messages through them to those other providers. So those are core providers that are not necessarily Jack Henry, right? So you'll see today we're integrated with Silver Lake and Scimitar. We're planning to also integrate with CIF 2020 and Core Director, but these would be other integrations for other core providers. So whether you're coming into the platform as a third party or you're going out to a third party, there's options for integrations and opportunities within the marketplace.
So I don't have to even use your user interface?
That's correct. You can write your own user interface, 100%. That is one of the goals.
It's not a shot at our design team, though.
Yeah, definitely not. Our design team is amazing. I appreciate them very much. So, and of course, you see down in the bottom right, the Fed is involved, right? There's a lot of complexity there, all the security and networking, as you might imagine, with the amount of money that's moving through the system. So I think the Federal Reserve today moves over 1 quadrillion, that's 15 zeros, of money annually. And that's one of the 3 major wire systems in the world today. So, all right. So if you were to talk about the types of messages that are involved in the ISO 22 spec, there's kind of 3 main areas. Paying or payment initiation, and that would be more on our consumer side. We don't really use it on the enterprise side. Consumer side would be, hey, as a customer, I walk into a financial institution or a Western Union, as an example, and I would like to send a wire. And so I make a payment request. And then what happens after that is that then gets turned into what's called a PAX format, right? And this information is all abstracted underneath our APIs. So when you look at the public API set, you won't necessarily see this type of information. So this is what's happening underneath the scenes. And these are the message formats that are communicated to and from the Fed.
So Jack Henry Wires has the full suite of ISO messages that it supports then, right?
Yep, that's 100% correct. So these are 3 of the main categories. One of the other categories is the ADME messages. We also support those as well. There's 7 or 8, I can't remember the exact amount. There's one of the things that the Fed has is they have like a health check as well. So like from a resiliency perspective, monitoring and stuff like that, we use that to say, hey, is the Fed actually up? Can we actually transmit, right? The system also has a lot of retries built in. So when things go bump, right, we know, but the system will try to auto-recover on its own and take action on behalf of the customer, whether that's the financial institution themselves or the financial institution's customers. With it, we also have the ability, if something does fail, like you can tell, and if it's beyond that retry, it has statuses, and you can use those statuses to try to kick it again. So in some cases, let's say the Fed was down for some time, and then they finally came back up, but our retries failed, they sent out a notification, you can retry those. You don't have to go in and resubmit that information and go through all that upfront work to do so. All right, so we'll kind of transition now into a little bit more about the APIs themselves. One of the things to understand from a routing perspective is that all of our APIs require the institution universal ID that the wire is for. So we have a multi-tenant solution, and that essentially says, hey, this set of authentication, right, the tokens that are involved are provisioned for that institution. If you want to call an API on behalf of that institution, you need to pass in that value that correlates to the authentication token that was obtained before accessing the APIs. On the v3 first approach, they are using v3 APIs. That's pretty much, we are conforming to the OpenAPI 3 spec. So that's the latest and greatest. When you look through the contracts, how they're formatted, all the input validation, stuff like that, it's all v3. We have a user abilities API. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into it. But there is a differentiation between using the abilities for an enterprise user. Again, that would be an employee of the financial institution, or the actual consumer, which would be a customer of the financial institution. And then last but not least, the UETR is a end-to-end messaging. So for an incoming wire, that comes from whoever initiated the wire. From an outgoing, that would be consumers of the Jack Henry Wires API. So that's very important because that's the main linkage for that, that financial message and any messages that might come off of it, right? So as you might imagine, with the ISO standard, the PAX 08s, the PAX 09s, those are kind of the base center, right? And the CAMTs and the ADMEs and the, not the pane, those come off of it. But, so, good? Yeah. But very, very important. So when you're working through the API set and you're kind of looking for those breadcrumbs to go from one feature set of functionality to another, the UETR is one of the main pieces that's used. So you can navigate between the APIs and reuse that to find out more information about the wire that was submitted. There's some other ones as well. There's like an OMAD and IMAD. Some of those get down into the specific ones, but you kind of traverse that tree of messages using those identifiers. It's very, very helpful when you're programming against the API set to understand how that linkage works. All right. So now we'll move into some demo, right? These are recorded videos. Feel free to ask questions of me afterwards during time. I can walk you through some of the finer details of how these work. We did talk about it a little bit before around the enterprise wire abilities. You can see this is a get endpoint, and similar to what we said, there's the institution universal ID. This happens to be the user ID that's involved, and you can see a full list of what is available to them and whether they have the ability or whether they don't. You might guess as you look through some of these at some of the functionalities that might be available. For example, wire fees. Wire fees is something that can be charged, and whether they have the ability to manage those fees. So that would be, again, in the enterprise ability, a Jack Henry or a financial institution employee that's doing those. So, of course, and then we have on the consumer side, and it's very similar. The call looks almost identical, but you'll notice some of these, this one in particular has an account ID at the end. And so because the customer can have more than one account ID and they can have different permissions per account, depending on how the financial institution has provisioned that account and those abilities for that user. These are a little less number of permissions today. They are growing as we build out the consumer experience. But it pretty much works very similar to the way the enterprise abilities work. Again, you'll have an enterprise token to use the enterprise abilities API, and you'll have a consumer token to use the consumer abilities API.
So just to say that more clearly, one system can handle multiple personas. We can handle institution-originated wires as well as consumer-oriented wires. So whether that's a treasury user or a retail user on their phone, the same system can support both.
Yep, that's a really good call out, Brad. That's 100% what we've been aiming for. So you don't have to use a different platform or a different set of APIs to achieve your goals, depending on the user experience that you're working to provide, right? Whether it's a third-party integrator, whether it's a financial institution as their back office administrating, or whether it's an experience for their end users or their customers. Seamless integration. All right, so list wire messages. This is one of our full text search. This is one of the more powerful points of the Jack Henry wire system, because when we talk about the various types of messages that the ISO standard supports, this essentially gives you the ability to find anything in the system that you're looking for. There are a couple pieces that are like, you got to kind of more drill down into it, but this is a pretty wide search within the system. So when I say like wide search, it's joining several tables together. Those tables also they use Cloud Spanner, and they use Cloud Spanner's full text search capabilities, right? So pretty much you can find anything you want through this.
So if I'm searching by debtor or by creditor or OMAD, IMAD, UETR, any of those things are all options with this API?
Yep. I can't remember if the IMAD and OMAD are directly in this one or not. I could be mistaken. There's a number of different filters and options that you can search for. The API should say exactly what those are, but it's kind of like where you start, I guess is the way I would say it, in my opinion. Okay, so the next set of APIs, there's one that's a little bit of a segment out, but they really are a logical flow of what are the steps that you need to complete to get to be able to actually successfully submit a wire. And so the account search is essentially the debtor, right? So who is sending the money, right? And these would be customers of the financial institution that we're sending money on behalf of. You can see it's a pretty simple GET API. It does have a search, so you can type in the name. Today we support either account ID full text search or last name and first name full text search. You will see that this actually does run against the foundational core. So this one runs a little bit slower on average, but this is how you find who when the financial institution is saying John Smith wants to send a wire. This is how they get to that point.
So first step of origination of wire is making sure you know who's sending the money, and that's what you're saying right here, right? The wire services offers those. You pull this back and you're taking the account ID out and you're taking it to your next request, is that right?
Yep, that's correct. So the response that comes off from the search, you would then select because it can return multiple results as it is an actual search, right? It's not a give me this individual person. So if there's multiple people with the same last name Smith, it will return multiple results. You would have to select the correct one from the list. And then there's information that's required off this response that you'll use later in the create wire flow to satisfy the required fields. Next part is the creditor search. Who is the money going to? It works very similar to the debtor search. However, this is not against the foundational core. This is actually against our repository of entities. So as the end users use the system and more entities are searched for and wires are submitted to, the system builds up that as a repository of information so that subsequent requests for the same users are able to be supplied. And similar to the previous API, the outputs from this are also used in the create wire. So you're trying to get to three things. Who is the money coming from? Who is it going to? And what is the bank that's sending the information?
On the back end of this, are we validating those entries before they are submitted to our repository? Are we checking like the ABA number and any of that stuff?
There is checking on some of the fields. We're working to add some additional checks, but yeah, ABA numbers are always validated. You can't get something in the system with an invalid ABA number.
So I've got my account, I've got where I'm sending the money to.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. You got it. Okay. So the last one is the institution search.
That's me, right?
Sorry.
That's me, right?
Yeah, you're the institution. And so this is basically, hey, which bank is going to facilitate the wire transaction? So you can, again, it's a full text search. This does not go against the foundational core. It goes against the Spanner database and it retrieves that information. You can see, 55 milliseconds, much better than 2.5 seconds.
What about intermediary banks?
Say that again?
Intermediary banks, do they show up in this list as well?
Intermediary banks will show up in that list as well. So it's very important to understand that sometimes banks don't actually transmit the wires themselves. They'll use an intermediary bank to do so. Yep. All right, this is the one I was saying earlier is a little bit outside the flow. I wanted to include it because it's something that may not be well known. But the financial institution may want to disclose some kind of information, whether it's a terms and conditions. This one's actually a disclaimer. There's also some other legal or regulatory things that they might want to include. For example, if you're going to print out a wire form and you wanted the end user to sign that form, this disclaimer would be on that form along with other regulatory or compliance type information for legal purposes. So this is something that you can do to get that information. There's some other APIs that work along with it, but it's very important, as you might guess, working with finances and financial institutions to have that legal jargon included. Okay, so this is the enterprise create wire. This would be the financial institution. It's also important to understand that financial institutions sometimes send wires themselves to make payments. So that would be the difference between a Pax 08, again, that's underneath the hood, or a Pax 09. But when you're going through the create wire flow and you've used the information from the account search, the creditor search, and the institution search to satisfy your create wire flow, you have the choice of sending a payment on behalf of the bank or a payment on behalf of, or a wire, I should say, on behalf of the end user, the customer of the bank.
So it manages whether it's a Pax 08 or Pax 09 for you. You don't have to think about it. You just fill in the values.
Yeah, you do have to pick which one you want. You have to specify it on the input. Yep. I'm saying it like I'm doing a UI, but because I know what the UI looks like, but behind the scenes, the API, you do have to say whether you're doing a consumer wire or an institution wire. So you can see, comes back, it'll echo the UETR right there. And this side, I scrolled during the recording, but this has the information that was collected from those other 3 steps. Again, there's also optional fields that you can fill in as well. Some of that information was filled in this request. And also it has a wire ID. So the wire ID is one of the other breadcrumbs that is used to traverse the system. And then the consumer wire pretty much looks the same. Main difference is you'll see there's a little bit of a difference in the format of the URL, which is analogous to all of the APIs within the platform, not just Jack Henry Wire. So there's different format between the enterprise and the consumer. But similarly, this information was collected during those previous APIs, and in this case, it echoes back a message ID to use as your breadcrumb for future operations around that. So, good. Okay, that's it. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time.